Hey guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing Comic Uno's Best Comics of the Week, and this is the show where I review all the comics I read this week in one show. We go least favorite to best pick of the week and everything in between, and of course at the end of the video we talk about the viewer's pick of the week for a chance of one of your comments to be featured in the video. Now I will say I'm a little under the weather, so I'm sorry if I sound a little nasally, but let's get started. We actually had a pretty average amount of books this week. Number 11 for me this week was Dark Ages issue 6. And this is a series I wanted to like a little bit more than I did, because I really liked the premiere issue of this book. And I think what is a shame is that it kind of ran out of steam for me. I think the bigger overall story about Apocalypse is something that didn't really interest me as much, and this was definitely more action heavy. I think there was definitely some shockers here, like what seems to be the death of Wolverine. I like those kind of bigger action moments, but the total build up to it just didn't fancy me as much, and I feel like it just wasn't for me. And I guess because Tom Taylor is moving to DC Comics, it also just kind of feels like it was there, and because it was so delayed as well. The artwork I think is okay. I think it could have been stronger in some parts, but it does the job. So giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 11. Moving on to number 10, and that is Immortal X-Men, issue 1. We first had Immortal Hulk, now we have Immortal X-Men. And I honestly have dropped most of the X-Men titles. I feel like this whole entire Krakoa thing kind of span out too much. It just been too many years. I feel like there hasn't really been a middle and end. There's been definitely a beginning of this book, but it's like, okay, so where is this going? And it just kind of has lost my interest overall. But I do like the idea that this was the flagship. What the hell does this have to do with Immortal Hulk? Utilizing that title, or at least the idea of immortality, which is a huge concept for Krakoa and a huge concept for the X-Men. So I wanted to see if there would be another twist to it. And there actually was in this arc. They definitely focus on the character from Powers of X and House of X, so we get to see a little bit of her here. For some reason, her name is totally slipping my mind. Starts with an M, but again, forgive me. I am under the weather, so the mind's a little cloudy today. But yeah, so I like seeing the connection of that, because it's been a while since we've seen her character. And so that was interesting. We do get to see an ending with that. But a lot of it was just setting up the pieces, like, well, this is who Kitty is. This is who Emma is. And it's kind of the same thing. It just feels like it's spinning its wheels. It didn't really grab me as much as I wanted to. But I am glad they had some plot threads that they were playing with here. But I don't know if it gave me enough for another issue. But the artwork was very fantastic for this. It definitely was a style you want for a flagship book like this. So overall, giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 10. Moving on to number 9, which is Spider-Woman issue 21. This is the surprise finale of this book. I did not know it was ending, and it kind of felt rushed, and that's why it's a little lower. It definitely threw a lot at you. We had this kind of jokey villain team that was introduced in the last issue, and then we have more of the family drama of Jessica Drew played with here. And I liked a lot of scenes. I love seeing the niece on a dinosaur, and it was a very action-heavy issue, and I thought the action was well done, but I wanted more from the finale. I wanted maybe a little bit more of an emotional punch here, and again, it maybe felt like this finale wasn't exactly planned. So overall, giving that 2.5 stars. Still very much recommend the series as a whole, but I thought the ending was a little bit of a letdown. So giving that number 9, I believe. So we are moving on to number 8. And number 8 for me is Hulk issue 5, and this is a series I've definitely been teetering and trying to make a choice if I'm going to keep it on my pull. I did want to see it through for the Thor arc, because I'm reading Thor, I'm loving Thor, it's one of my favorite Marvel titles right now, and with Donny Cates, sometimes he has a slower burn, and then he kind of blows up. And here, I definitely saw a little bit more direction, and we definitely get a lot of interesting fights here, a lot of interesting Hulk-type characters introduced, but I really like Betty here, even though it's not actually Betty. I liked what it meant for Hulk's mind, and I enjoyed that direction. I still feel like you were thrown into this kind of craziness without any explanation, and there still is not so much explanation, and that's kind of taken me out of this book, but, you know, the action is so good. It's Invincible action. It's the same artist as Invincible, and that plays really well here, and I enjoyed the pacing to that concept. And Like I said, I want to see what the Thor arc ends up doing for this, but I hope it kind of sends us in another direction and kind of slows down and puts the brakes a little bit, because I think that's what's going to really help this series. Because I think it has a really fun idea, and I like the concept of what it's doing for the brain of Hulk and who's actually taking over, but it's so far not really grabbing me as much as I wanted to. So giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 8, I believe. All right, moving on to number 7, which is Batman Beyond the White Knight, issue 1. I am not a huge Batman Beyond fan, so, I picked this up because I am a White Knight fan, but I do feel like the franchise of White Knight has been spinning its wheels a lot. There's a lot that has been released for it, and now we're almost fast-forwarding, I think, over 10 years, because we get to see Harley's kids as teenagers, and they were just babies in the last arc, and it definitely jumps a lot. We get to see a little bit of Harley. We get a bit of a story with Jason Todd, and then we get a story with the Batman Beyond beginning here as well. And we get to see Bruce in jail. So he's been in jail for a little while now. But yeah, it kind of jumped a little bit too much for me. And then the ending, Joker returns. I'm like, okay, cool. I feel like that's all we really got is the Joker relationship. We did get Azrael in the last arc, which honestly didn't do as much for me. So maybe you do need the return of the Joker. I think the things that were most interesting were the threads that were continued from previous stories. Like, the relationship with Bruce and Jason, or really the Harley Quinn relationship with her children. But I don't know if it gave me enough to say, hey, I need that issue too, and this is a franchise that should continue to go on. And I think that's the struggle of the White Knight story thus far. Sometimes there could just be a one and done, and that is okay. So overall, giving that 3 stars. Not a bad story at all. I think there's actually some interesting tidbits, but just don't know if it gave enough for that next issue. Moving on to number 6, which is Aquaman issue 2. And if you're an Aquaman fan, I think you're going to enjoy this. There's definitely some interesting characters that show up. A lot of the main characters of Aquaman that show up. Tula, Garth, obviously Jackson being the lead of this book. And it's Jackson telling everybody, hey, something's up with Aquaman. He's teaming up with Black Manta. This makes no sense. And that's pretty much the whole issue. He even goes to Orm to say, hey, I think something's up with Aquaman. And, it's very slow in that regard. And that's why, I could only really give this 3 stars. But the artwork is phenomenal for this book. I think the facial expressions work so well. And again, I like the introduction of characters we don't get to see very often, like Garth and Tula. And just seeing them all interact and be a family is cool. But the overall plot, I'm like, is it interesting enough to do a full series on this? And I wish it kind of focused more on Arthur and Jackson's relationship together. We don't really get to see them together in this issue that much. So overall, giving this 3 stars. I'm going to see how long I keep this on my pull list as someone who's not a hardcore Aquaman fan, but I want to see more Jackson. So giving that 3 stars. Moving on to number 5, which is The Amazing Spider-Man, issue 93. I am so torn on this book. So I am going to do a final verdict video later this week to talk about my overall thoughts on Spider-Man Beyond as we get into the next chapter of Spider-Man. But this one, I feel like for most of the issue, I was kind of bored. It was a lot of the same things that we've seen before in this arc, where Ben has forgotten his memories. Peter is I guess, trying to get through to him, and we get to see that kind of verse battle between Ben and Peter. It's not really until those last few pages where you're like, oh, that's interesting, where we get to see Ben become a new villain, it looks like, for Spider-Man, and his name is Chasm. It looks like a kind of combination of Venom and Carnage and some glowy creature. So we know that he's going to show up and be a bigger part, maybe in the next arc, maybe in his own book. So he's a villain again, it looks like, or at least maybe an anti-hero, which I'm like, all right, I've seen that for Ben before. And then we get to see this kind of bright light where MJ and Peter want to move in together, and I guess someone wants to stop them because, of course, they can't be together. So, I didn't love that ending, but I was like, oh, cool, what's that ominous figure? Because, one more day can never be untied. And then, I like the costume design of Ben. And I'm like, I kind of wish that was this issue, because it took the whole issue to get to that point, and it's just really teasers. You don't really get to see the answers, even though the teasers are kind of interesting. So overall, I gave this 3 stars. Like I said, I was very torn. I like the artwork for the most part. There's some good battles here, but the overall scope of Beyond, I don't think really did it for me. Hopefully there's enough teasers and, I would say, Easter eggs to jump us into this new run of Spider-Man to really follow through with some of these ideas. So giving that 3 stars, and that is number 5. Moving on to number 4, which is Radiant Black issue 13. And this is mostly a setup issue. It's the first part of Radiant Black season 2, and we get to see Marshall what's the other main guy's name? Nathan. Nathan returns, and you kind of get a little bit from their friendship, and Nathan's life is kind of turning up. It seems like he's back with his girlfriend. He's figuring out his money issues, and he's just trying to live life again, even with this haunting figure talking to him that he's trying to ignore. And Marshall's just kind of getting into the groove of being Radiant Black and what that means for his overall life, when everyone's kind of disliking him because he's, not taking on his responsibilities. Very Spider-Man-esque storyline there. And we get a little bit of their friendship and the big villain of this arc as well, which I'm guessing is going to be connected to Nathan in the long run. I felt like the artwork was very strong when it came to the superhero aspect, but I felt like the people weren't as strong as it usually is. Felt a little rushed at times, especially the beginning of the issue. But overall, I thought it was a good setup. I can't wait to see where Radiant Black goes, and I think there's definitely some interesting tidbits here, but there weren't any wildly crazy moments for this issue. So overall, giving that 3.5 stars, and that is number 4. Moving on to number 3, which is Silk issue 3. This issue I felt was just everything I kind of like about Silk, and honestly, it's probably because they didn't focus on the main villain that much. I feel like the previous issues were so much about the main villain that I didn't quite care about, but it focused more on just Cindy trying to find herself outside of Silk, and even outside her job. She's like, okay, well, who is Cindy Moon? I never really had a chance to kind of grow as a person and understand that. So it's that struggle that I think every, young 20-year-old or 20-something-year-old deals with, and I kind of enjoyed that aspect of it. So I thought that was cool, and I think there was some really awesome dialogue work with just Cindy Moon being Cindy Moon. And of course, I always love Takashi's artwork. I feel like it fits really well for this kind of young adult storyline that's going on. And overall, I just had a fun time with it, and it was the better direction of what I want to see from Silk. So giving that 3.5 stars, and that is number 3. Moving on to number 2, which is Rogue Sun, issue 2. And man, I really enjoyed this issue. I like that we get a little bit more of a feel of who our main character is. I state him as the Flash Thompson of this series. How about if Flash Thompson was Peter Parker? Peter Parker was the nerdy guy. He became Spider-Man. But how about the villain, the bully, became a hero? That obviously is an oxymoron, because it's just like, can a bully, a mean person, become a superhero? And I really like that concept being explored here. But also there's just the family stuff, where we get to learn a little bit more about the siblings and their relationship with the Rogue Sun mythos that we got a little teased in that first story. And then, the bigger story of his relationship with his dad, and him not wanting a relationship with his dad, and this kind of complexity of that. So there's just a lot of nuance in this issue that just grows the more the character-driven aspect of this series, while still growing this mythology, getting a glimpse of maybe the bigger villain here, and getting a glimpse of who Rogue Sun is as just a superhero. So I thought this was a really solid issue. I love the art style. It's very Dan Mora, in my opinion. It aces the facial expressions, aces the action. So very, very solid second issue. So giving that 4 stars, and that is number 2. Moving on to number 1, and that is Shadow War Alpha, issue 1. And I am not usually a big fan of event series. I don't usually love the crossover books. So I'm like, okay, they sometimes feel really forced just for the idea of having a crossover and having a big title. But this one is the complete opposite of that. If you've been reading Robin especially, there's just been such build up to this moment. Robin and Damian missing his grandfather figure, which was Alfred, really his grandfather, and then his relationship with his other grandfather, which is Ra's al Ghul. And in this issue, we get to see Ra's is kind of getting to this moment of revealing himself to everybody and whatever his grand plan is going to be, and also trying to fix his family dynamic, and then he gets shot by Deathstroke, and everyone's like, we're gonna get Deathstroke. And obviously this has kind of been tied into the Robin series, because we got Ravager, we got Rose, who is a main character there, and even a friend to Damian. So what's her role gonna be in this? And then obviously we had Respawn introduced as well. And then in the end, the kind of bigger storyline is that we actually don't know who killed Ra's al Ghul because Deathstroke says he didn't do it. This is somebody else. So there's just so many interesting moving parts, and I just thought the pacing was brilliant for this, where especially that double page spread of Ra's dying. I didn't know what was going to happen, so I was like, whoa, that was cool. I didn't see that happening, and it's just such a nice page turn. But then also just the relationship between him and Batman. You know, we haven't really seen Damian with Batman because in a brilliant way, Williamson kind of took Damian away and said, no, let's see who Damian is without the shadow of the bat. And did such a great arc with that, and now says, okay, Damian has changed. What will it be like now that he's interacting with Batman, who's not a great dad? And we really get to see some moments of that. And the artwork is so good, so consistent for this book as well, when it comes to the action and the emotional moments here. So overall, really like this one. I thought was a brilliant start to this crossover, which has been really building within Batman and Deathstroke Inc. and Robin. And I think what's great about this is that Williamson was writing all three series. So it really does tie together and feels like an event for the sake of story and not for the sake of an event. And I think that works so well here. So overall, giving that 4.5 stars, and that is my pick of the week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno, and let me know in the comments below what your pick of the week was, and in the comments below you could do that. And from last week, the viewer's pick of the week was Robin, and here are some comments about that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.